YouTube, what is up? James, MTG Biggie here, and I'm going to apologize ahead of time if I sound a little weird. I'm under the weather, I don't feel very great right now, but I wanted to make a video this weekend, and I had a pretty good topic and a pretty good idea. Something that I've talked about a lot on this channel, and that is Death and Taxes. As you can see, my background here is still Thalia, Guardian of Thraben. I want to talk about Modern specifically. I'm going to talk about two variations of Death and Taxes that are both viable in Modern, and I'm going to talk about some of the differences and some of the pros and cons to each, and then I'm going to talk about which deck I like better overall, and kind of why that is. So I'm going to break them down into various separate topics and then talk about an overall sort of feel. We're going to talk about the consistency, the power level of each, the play style of each, as well as sideboarding and where they stand in the meta right now. So without further ado, let's get into it. First of all, Mono White Death and Taxes is a deck that leverages Thalia, Guardian of Thraben, as well as Leonin Arbiter, and a lot of mana denial. You're on 4 Ghost Quarter, 4 Tectonic Edges usually, and then you play a annoying little creature game where you try to deny your opponents their resources while beating them down slowly over the course of 4 or 5 turns with a bunch of annoying creatures. Your end game and your top end is Restoration Angel, as you see here, and Flickerwisp are generally the most powerful creatures in your deck, and you utilize those creatures to blink and take advantage of enter the battlefield triggers on stuff like Thraben Inspector, Blade Splicer, even blinking like Flickerwisp and Resto blinking each other for value. You can blink their threats to kind of stall out their plan, and the deck is very much a closer but still pretty different from the legacy counterpart of the deck, but definitely closer to the legacy deck than the black-white Eldrazi and Taxes deck. Then you have black-white Eldrazi and Taxes, which is still playing the Thalias, the Leonin Arbiters, the Flickerwisp, stuff like that, but then where it changes greatly is toward the top end, where the mono-white deck is playing Resto and Flickerwisp. You're still playing Flickerwisp, but then you're playing Thought-Knot Seer as your kind of curve topper, and you're leveraging Eldrazi Displacer, and you're using powerful lands like Eldrazi Temple to try to cast these guys early and use the mana to activate your Displacers. So it's going to differ quite a bit. The playstyles are very, very similar sometimes, but drastically different at others. As far as consistency goes, the mono-white version has a very, very straightforward plan. It works best when you start with turn 1 Aether Vial into a turn 2 Thraben Inspector plus Thalia, and then work your way up to have Leonin Arbiter and start ghost quartering your opponent as much as possible, as early as possible, and then just beat them down with a bunch of 2/2s and 2/1s and win the game that way. The black-white Eldrazi and Taxes deck plays a lot of black cards, a lot of white cards, and a lot of colorless cards, and you need mana specifically for all 3 of them. So instead of a monocolored deck, you've gone from a 1-color to a 3-color deck, basically. You have to have pain lands in your deck, like Caves of Koilos, to be able to play Thought-Knot Seer, to activate your Eldrazi Displacers, to cast your Wasteland Stranglers. You have to have the black mana, but you get access to things like Tidehollow Sculler as well, and you are still playing Aether Vials. And I feel like the black and white version isn't quite as consistent just because of the fact that the mana is so awkward sometimes. And sometimes you draw like the mono-white Death and Taxes part of the deck and sometimes you draw the full-on Eldrazi part of the deck. So the deck can play very differently, where you're worried about playing Aether Vial into Thalia or Tide Hollow Sculler, or you're just worried about playing Eldrazi Temple into Eldrazi Temple and Thought-Knot Seer on turn 2 or 3. So it pulls the deck in sort of two different directions, and sometimes you can draw the right lands to cast the Eldrazi, but not have the Eldrazi, or draw the right lands to cast the Death and Taxes mono white stuff in that deck, and not have that stuff and just have all this Eldrazi that you're going to have to wait to cast and not be able to cast on time or not cast early like you're kind of hoping to. So as far as consistency goes, we'll take a look at who I feel wins, which deck I feel is the better deck for consistency, and that is mono white Death and Taxes. Again, the streamlined mana, you're playing 10 planes, you're playing one color, you don't have to worry about needing double white and double black in some cases, because I know some of the Eldrazi builds are playing Liliana of the Veil, as well as stuff like Flickerwisp, which can be really, really awkward on your mana. So, consistency, it's all about the mono white Death and Taxes. Now, as far as power level goes, we'll talk about, first I'll talk about the mono white. The mono white Death and Taxes deck is powerful together. Thalia with Leonin Arbiter and Ghost Quarter, and having the means to deny your opponent mana is really, really powerful. Turning your Path to Exiles into having no drawback and just saying 1 mana destroy target creature or exile target creature is really, really powerful. However, by themselves, or if the pieces don't quite fall together, or if your curve isn't as fluid as you want it to be, or your hand draws awkwardly, assembling that power level or whatever can be more difficult. Whereas sometimes in the Eldrazi and Taxes deck, you can just draw 2 Eldrazi Temples in your opening hand and have Thought-Knot Seer into Thought-Knot Seer. So, like, individually, the cards are more powerful in the Eldrazi deck. I feel like the mono-white deck's more synergistic, where the Eldrazi deck, you could just draw awkward hands, but your payoff is that much more powerful. Even though your hands are going to be less consistent and awkward, the cards that you're getting to eventually are a little bit more powerful. So, in that aspect, in that respect, your winner is Eldrazi and Taxes. Thought-Knot Seer is just really, really powerful. Having access to things like Liliana of the Veil is really, really powerful. Having the ability to activate an Eldrazi Displacer over and over and over again is really powerful. And also having black spells in your deck, possibly you could play Dark Confidant, you play Liliana of the Veil. These are some of the best black cards ever printed in Magic. So, having access to them, you're just individually more powerful threat-wise than the mono-white version. Now, as far as playstyle, this one's going to be more relative to you. It's going to be more subjective. As far as I go, I love the Legacy Death and Taxes deck. I really like using Thalia to her fullest power level, or your fullest advantage with her. I like Aether Vial on turn 1 more than most people. That's the sort of deck I like to play, and having mana denial and stuff like that speaks more to my playstyle personally. So the mono white deck is something that tends to lend itself more toward my playstyle because I like playing decks that are more consistent. I will sacrifice some power level, like from the Eldrazi and Taxes deck, to play a deck that's more consistent with its mana. Nothing frustrates me more than drawing awkward mana or having lands come into play tapped, or taking 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 damage from pain or shock lands and fetch lands, when oftentimes having a simple mana base where you're like planes into Ghost Quarter is much more consistent, and that's what lends itself to my sort of playstyle. So as far as the playstyle of the two decks go, what I prefer is going to be the mono white Death and Taxes. While Thought-Knot Seer is really powerful, if I want to play a Thought-Knot Seer deck, I'm certainly going to play it in a Death and Taxes style deck, but I would rather play a Thalia, a Mirran Crusader, a Resto Angel, a Flickerwisp, a Serra Avenger, sort of consistently weaker, but more my style of threats. That will take us on to sideboarding with both of the decks. Both of the decks' sideboards are basically pretty much the same. The mono white deck has access to white cards. White cards are the best sideboard cards in Magic, especially in Modern. So we get to play all the rest in pieces. We get to play all of the Stony Silences. We get to play Relic of Progenitus. We get to play sweepers if we want them. I know Dusk Till Dawn's kind of a big deal. Settle the Wreckage is something I'm experimenting with in the mono white version lately. So we have access to all the good white stuff. However, and the good artifacts, I guess. However, black-white Eldrazi and Taxes gets access to the black cards too. So they get cards like Fatal Push, which become Path to Exile number 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 if they want them, or 5, 6, 7, 8 if they want them. They can have access to cards like Liliana in their main deck or as a sideboard card. You can play cards like Thoughtseize, Inquisition of Kozilek. You can play a Surgical Extraction, which you can play in the mono-white version, but you can actually cast it for mana and not take the damage, which comes up sometimes. So that being said, as far as sideboarding goes, Eldrazi and Taxes, when you have more colors and more access, it makes sense. You can play all the black cards that you feel like from the Modern format in addition to the white cards. It's really close and not that relevant. The big draw is Fatal Push, but when the mono white deck doesn't get Fatal Push, we still have all the good cards as far as sideboards go. It's all about the rest in pieces and the Stony Silences, really. So that's close, but Eldrazi clearly has the advantage there. Now, as far as the meta goes, right now the Modern meta is pretty wide open. There are a lot of Valakut decks. Scapeshift is problematic for both of the decks. I feel like the Eldrazi deck may have a little bit of an advantage there because of Thought-Knot Seer, but the Storm deck is kind of coming up as well. The mono-white deck can be more consistent, where the black and white Eldrazi deck can be a little more dirtily, and if you dirtle at all with Storm, they could just go off and win. So both decks have their pluses and minuses in certain matches. I know how to play both decks very well, and I feel like I've spent more time on the mono-white deck, and I've had some good success with that deck. So personally, I probably would be better off in any blind meta playing the mono-white deck just because I know how to play it, and I prefer that sort of consistency. But the black and white deck is obviously more powerful. So I think as far as the meta goes, the decks are dead tied in a heat, and I don't think one is better than the other currently. That can change, obviously, but at this moment, at the time of this recording, I think they're about tied for the meta positioning right now. And that leads me to which deck of the two I prefer overall. And I think it's been pretty clear, I haven't really hit it throughout all of this, that if I'm sleeving up and going, if I were to say playing at the Modern GP this weekend, I'm sleeving up mono white. It's probably my favorite deck in Modern overall. I love the consistency of it. I like the way it plays similarly to the Legacy deck. I like frustrating the hell out of my opponents while I blow their lands up and just beat them down with dudes that seem kind of innocuous. So as far as that goes, that's where I'm at. I have it sleeved up here. Next time I go out and play Modern, it's probably going to be Mono White Death and Taxes. I don't think that's a surprise to anybody. I actually came off of Mono White and I moved over to Black and White Eldrazi because I wanted to try it out. I wanted to play around with the deck, see how it felt, see how I liked it. I have a binder with all my stuff where I can switch in and out of decks for different styles. So I have like my little Death and Taxes toolkit here, and I have all the stuff to swap it over to the Black-White Eldrazi deck. And I did for a while, and I played a couple local tournaments, and I did pretty decently with it. The deck's good, but it irritates me to no end to not have the amount of consistency that playing 10 planes in a deck can give you. So that's where I'm at right now. In the future, I'll probably play more Black and White Eldrazi and Taxes as well. Both decks are great. If you want to pick up a fun deck to play, and you want to be interactive and annoying and play a deck that can pivot from control to aggro within the span of a couple turns, I recommend either of them. I certainly recommend the Black-White Eldrazi deck over most of the other decks in the format, but as far as these two go, if I'm going to pick up one of them, it's probably going to be Mono White. The deck is probably by far my favorite deck in Modern, not close. But like I said, Black and White Eldrazi and Taxes is great. Again, you get access to more powerful cards. So I think it takes a more consistent, more knowledgeable player to do well with the Mono White deck, whereas the Black White deck, you can play. Anybody could drop a turn 2 Thought-Knot Seer and do pretty well in that game. So if you don't have the time to put in the reps with Mono White, maybe the Eldrazi and Taxes deck is for you. Either way, both are great. I'm always going to be casting Thalias no matter what, and I'm going to hopefully do it off of an Aether Vial, and I'm going to annoy the piss out of whoever I'm playing against. That is my goal in Magic and in Modern, and I hope to continue to do it for a long time. So, what do you guys think? Which version of the deck is your favorite? Which version would you pick up and take to a tournament? I know not many people agree with me, obviously, because Eldrazi are just really, really powerful, and a lot of people would rather just be slamming Thought-Knot Seers. But there are other decks that do that. Eldrazi Tron, Bant, Eldrazi, both decks that can slam that turn 2 Thought-Knot. Honestly, I just like things the way I like them, simple and straight to the point. But let me know down below what you've thought. I'll also leave a couple deck lists in the description and maybe some links to some other D&T content on here. I just wanted to come up with something that was sort of a fun video that talked about both of the decks compared and can be sort of a guide as to try to help folks who are considering playing one of the two decks, to point them in the right direction. Another thing is price consideration. The Mono White deck's pretty cheap. I think the Black White deck's a little more expensive, especially if you're playing Bobs and Lilianas, obviously. So that's another thing to consider. But either way, that's all I've got. I'm going to go blow my nose. I appreciate you guys for toughing it out with me, and I'll talk to you guys again very soon.